Hello everyone and welcome to this video on entry modes. So you really do need to have watched this week's videos on internationalization motives and internationalization strategies before moving on to the pair of videos on country selection and entry mode. It is a complex topic this week and there are lots of interrelated factors. But for this video, we're going to specifically be focusing on the question of how international businesses enter and operate in new markets. So we're going to be looking at the range of different entry modes available to international businesses and some of the specifics, advantages and disadvantages of each. So if we start by looking at the spectrum of entry modes, there are quite a lot. We're going to be focusing on the 6 major entry modes, which are import and export, exporting, licensing, franchising, joint ventures, acquisitions, and greenfield FDI, foreign direct investment, often just referred to as FDI or foreign direct investment. So there is a lot of entry modes here that we are going to be looking at. So the first thing that we're going to be doing is actually looking at some of the factors that we have to consider when trying to select one of these or trying to match one of these to a particular scenario or a particular context. Now, there are a lot of factors that we can and should consider when thinking about the way that we can enter a particular market, but there are some which are more important than others. We obviously need to have a strong understanding of some of the basic requirements of matching up or finding the appropriate entry mode. So goals and objectives of the organization would obviously be key. So how they fundamentally operate in other international markets, if this isn't their first foreign market that they're entering. The availability of partners to consider things like joint ventures and exporting. The conditions in the market itself are obviously very important. So the way the competitive environment in the market itself is arranged may significantly impact decisions such as adding new capacity through FDI or going in through acquisitions, the resources and capability of the organization, the strategic importance of the market that is being entered. However, what we are going to focus in on is 2 specific factors and use those to organize and explore the different entry modes. And that's going to be the degree of risk present within each entry mode and the degree of control that each entry mode offers. So that's the way we're going to be organizing and moving through the entry modes. And that's because there is always going to be a payoff between these 2. Generally speaking, they are proportionally related. So the greater the degree of control that we want over our operation, then that is usually accompanied by an increased degree of risk as well. So we can arrange our entry modes in a table that looks something like this. So we have degree of risk there along the left, and we can see with the green line that as our degree of risk increases, so does our degree of control. And this is a pretty basic principle when we're considering entry modes. If we want more and more control over the way consumers interact and consume our products and services, if we want more control over how they're sold, how they're marketed, if we want more control over the logistics and the operation itself, then that will almost always be accompanied by increased risk as well. So we're going to arrange our 6 entry modes along this principle, and we have importing and exporting as the entry mode with the lowest degree of control, but also then the lowest degree of risk, going all the way through to greenfield FDI, which offers the highest degree of control, but also represents the highest degree of risk. Looking at our first entry mode along this table, which is importing and exporting. and we're just going to take a bit of a closer look at this. So importing and exporting is simply, well, we're going to be focusing on exporting. So entering a new market through exporting is simply taking your goods or services produced in presumably a different country and allowing and selling it to consumers residing it in your new country that you're entering. So we need to distinguish between direct and indirect exporting. So direct exporting is where the international business will sell directly to retailers or distributors. So even with direct exporting, generally speaking, the international business, in this case a producer, is not selling to the consumers, but rather selling to the retailers within that country. However, with indirect exporting, the producer or the international business is selling to an intermediary, so an agent of some description, who's then going to sell on to the retailer or the distributors. So indirect exporting offers even less control because then with direct exporting, at least the international business can dictate or negotiate particular terms of sale, so exercise some degree of control over how the product or service is going to be sold to consumers. With indirect exporting, even that is significantly reduced. But for both direct and indirect exporting, the international business or the producer has relatively little control over how those goods and services are marketed and consumed by the end customers, but they also then have very little risk involved as well. There's no infrastructure, there's no marketing investment, there's no warehouses, there's no retail outlets that they need to set up, there's no offices that they need to develop. And staff, all of those things aren't present, so that hugely reduces the risk, the investment risk of exporting, but that does come with concurrent lack of control as well. So that does give us some fairly clear advantages. Low cost, low risk. It's very flexible. You can export into a market, and if your product is simply not selling in that market, those goods can be redirected elsewhere in the future. It also allows you to see if there is actually an appetite for your product, if there is actually demand amongst the consumers in that market before you make a more substantial investment in terms of perhaps FDI or acquisitions. So those are pretty clear advantages, but you do have some significant disadvantages as well. So obviously tariffs and trade barriers are going to be a potential disadvantage that can be sidestepped by actually more direct investment. So here we're producing the goods elsewhere and then we're bringing them into the target country to sell. That's not really an issue when it comes to FDI and actually setting up production in that country. Then the goods that are being produced and sold are being produced in that country and therefore won't be subject to the same tariffs and trade barriers, but you will be subject to them if you're exporting. The usual issues with exchange rates, because you don't have any facilities and offices in the target country, you're going to have to bring that capital back to usually your home country of operation, and that raises issues with exchange rates. But possibly the most important disadvantage for our purposes is that you will gain relatively limited information about that market. So valuable information and data that comes from actually engaging with consumers and selling direct to consumers, that's going to be kept by the retailers. Some information will obviously trickle back upstream in the supply chain, but that is going to be relatively limited. So you're not going to be able to learn a huge amount about the target country because you're not engaging directly with the consumers in that target country itself. So a good spread of advantages, but obviously very significant disadvantages as well. So if we're going to move further up and have the next entry mode, which is licensing, which offers significantly more control, but also increased risk as well. And that's certainly something which still doesn't require huge amounts of investment. So it's relatively cheap compared to the other entry modes further up in terms of the higher degrees of control, but still does more than simply allow you to sell to other distributors or retailers. So with licensing, we're talking about some form of intellectual property or non-tangible assets. So those can be, and I'd refer you guys back to our legal systems video in week 2, where we look at some of the major types of intellectual property. So the ones that can be licensed, we are talking about things like patents, copyrights, and trademarks. So those can be licensed, so giving a limited license for those types of non-tangible assets or intellectual property to be used by a firm or an organization in your target market. Can be exclusive or non-exclusive, so you can grant exclusive rights to one company, or you can grant non-exclusive rights to a number of companies, and that can allow you to increase your visibility within a target market. So your branding may be used, your trademarks may be used, your patents may be used, and so on. So the terms of the contract can very much grant you more control than what exporting will be able to grant you, but because you're ultimately not gaining revenue directly from those commercial interactions, you're still not engaging with the consumers in your target market. It's still going to be through intermediaries and through other firms. So you're gaining revenue from your license agreements rather than directly from the consumers. You're not engaging directly with the consumers. So if we move on from licensing and look at the next entry mode, this is franchising. So again, slightly more control, but also a higher degree of risk as well. Franchising, even if you're not familiar with the term, you've almost certainly interacted with franchises of some kind. So here we're combining both the licensing of intangible or non-tangible assets, but also along with the transfer of business systems. So we're talking about things like McDonald's or Burger King or KFC, where the individual owners and operators of specific McDonald's businesses or Burger King businesses are actually local, for the most part, local business owners. They've licensed both the intellectual property involved, so the trademarks and the patents, and the copyrights as well, but also the entire business system, so the system of cooking in McDonald's kitchens, the supply chains, the ingredients, the seating arrangements, everything is transferred over. So that's what we would call a franchise. Now, franchising is very much the first of our entry modes that we've looked at that requires significant investment in the target country. So even though the risk is shared, so because the actual physical units, the retail outlets, so if we're talking about KFC, the actual KFC stores are owned and operated by local partners, so local businessmen or business people or local investors. There is still a significant amount of infrastructure that is needed to allow them to operate as planned. So you're going to have to create a local supply chain to supply those KFC outlets with the ingredients and the chicken and so on. And you are going to have to create a logistics network as well in order to transport things around the country. So even though we're sharing the risk, it is not the minimum amount of investment that exporting and licensing requires. Rather, franchising does require almost certainly employing people in your target market, opening up offices, setting up supply chains and perhaps production facilities, and certainly setting up logistics networks. So there is a lot more investment required, and that obviously increases the risk, despite the fact that by franchising, you are by definition partnering with local actors. You're not just taking on all of the risk yourself. But that does give you the ability to control a lot more. You're not directly operating the outlets yourself, but through the use of contractual arrangements, you are able to exert a significant degree of control. So we're seeing that the cost of investment is going up, and the risk therefore is going up as well, but we are having increasing amounts of control. So the next step up would be joint ventures. So as it sounds like, a joint venture is where at least two, but sometimes more companies are forming a distinct separate entity to engage in a particular particular commercial activity. So the example of Sony Ericsson, which is a joint venture between Sony and Ericsson, formed for the purpose of engaging in the smartphone market using both Ericsson's heritage in telecommunications, as well as Sony's personal electronics branding and relationship with consumers. The other example we have here is Hulu, which is now really in jeopardy with the rise of Disney Plus, and rumors of I think NBC either have or are close to launching their own streaming service, but originally was an attempt to combine the content and the strengths of the three parent companies, and really make a play for the streaming market. So we're looking to really combine the strengths of the individual companies to go into a particular industry or to go into a particular market without competing against each other, but rather cooperating with each other. Now, this obviously would entail lots of investment. You would have to, for Sony Ericsson, you're setting up production facilities, setting up complex supply chains, complex distribution networks, signing deals to actually get your products in front of consumers. So whether that's with mobile networks or with distributors and retailers like Carphone Warehouse. So huge amounts of investment is needed. But both your risk and control are significantly reduced because you're actually sharing that risk and that control with another partner. So it may seem like you're setting up a new business from scratch, and you are, but it's still significantly less risk than FDI, because you're not shouldering all of that risk by yourself. You are actually forming a separate joint venture with at least one other partner. Now, we're going to move on to the last two now. And both acquisitions and greenfield FDI are intertwined in a way because they lead to the same outcome. So unlike the previous four, exporting, licensing, franchising and joint ventures, both acquisitions and greenfield FDI will lead to our international business directly engaged fully in our target market. So with their own operations, their own production facilities, their own retail outlets, whatever fits their business model, but operating fully in our target market. The difference is how they actually get there. So as you'd imagine, with acquisitions, it's through actually acquiring or purchasing a company which is already trading in the target market. So this is very rapid, very quick. It allows you to directly start or continue rather trading as soon as you have completed the acquisition. So your acquired company already has recognizable branding, already has a built-in customer base, and you also avoid adding any further capacity to the market. So you're not adding a new provider which has to jostle for position and which adds new capacity to the market. You're simply taking over an existing provider and taking over their existing capacity. You also sidestep all the logistical and administrative problems of starting up a new branch of your company. So you have existing offices, existing staff. You really have an already running concern. However, that comes with very high cost. You're unable to really determine the configuration of your acquired company. You take it as it comes. You can't, just magically change them from having a particular distribution network to one that you think would be better. That change has to come over time and with significant additional cost. And you still need to integrate your acquisition into the parent company, which will likely come with cultural differences, both national culture and organizational culture, and any other challenges that come from integrating an already existing brand and marketing effort into your wider global brand and marketing efforts. So we're really talking about the payoff here between speed. So instantly acquiring an already running concern, an already trading company with all of the drawbacks of integration, additional cost, and pre-existing configuration. These are not present in our final entry mode, which is Greenfield FDI. So this presents us with the highest degree of control as well as the highest degree of risk. So we aren't dealing with the pre-existing configurations. We're actually building our new branch or subsidiary directly as the international business wants in our new target market. So there's no integration issues. There's no set configuration issues. You can configure your logistics networks or distribution networks however you like, but you are adding new capacity to the market. So instead of acquiring, let's say, the sixth biggest competitors in that particular industry, you're going to be going in and adding a seventh new player. So adding new capacity always comes with increased risk. You don't have that built-in customer base. You don't have that built-in branding and marketing appeal. You're going to have to develop your brand in your target market from scratch. You're going to have to develop new marketing efforts and so on. But it does mean that you're building everything from scratch, and therefore it can be built already integrated into how your organization runs. You're not going to have to try and combine, merge, or integrate different brands. You can leverage your global brand depending on the type of internationalization strategy that you're following. And you can really exert maximum control over how you operate in that country. But as ever, with maximum control, you are also dealing with maximum risk as well.